Mm. Mm. Hello, and you are very welcome back to Bookstr Talks. My name is Saoirse, and I am honoured to be joined by the wonderful writer extraordinaire, Bess Kalb.
Saoirse, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to Bookstr for having me.
Of course, and thank you everybody for tuning in a little bit late, but as with anything good is worth waiting for, so you guys are very welcome for that. I don't even know where to begin with Bess's long, wonderful career. But Bess has written before for the Jimmy Kimmel Show Live, and also, which we are here to talk about today, it's her wonderful, wonderful memoir, Nobody Will Tell You This But Me, a true story as told to me, I think is the correct tagline.
Sure.
So I have a bit of a bad habit of asking anybody this, but if you could sum up your book in a couple of words, what would you go with?
That's not a bad if that's your bad habit, then great.
My fatal flaw.
No, it's a great question. In a few words, fortunately, I have a liberal definition of a few. But, yeah, I would say in a few words, this book, which I can even hold up like I'm on QVC or something.
Here's what I made earlier.
The book is a love letter from my grandmother to me, but it is also a love letter from me to my grandmother.
A few words. So I think that works. And so how did the book come about? What made you decide to kind of put it all in writing?
Yeah, this book came about after my grandma Bobby, who was my best friend, and that's an odd thing to say. We were born over 60 years apart, but we didn't speak every day. We spoke on the phone as I drove back from work every day. If I didn't hear from her or she didn't hear from me, we would assume the other one was dead, and freak out, and my mom would get involved. But this book came about because that woman, who is such an integral part of my life, passed away. She died at the age of 90, and I missed her terribly. I missed talking to her. I missed having her in my life. And when it was my job to give the eulogy at her funeral, I spoke in her words about the funeral and about our relationship. And when I did that and saw my family see that I could channel her and recognize her voice and laugh and cry along with me, I knew, okay, maybe there's something more to this. Maybe I'm able to memorialize her through her own words in a bigger way. And that brought about the book.
And so with something like that, was it easy for you to kind of assume her voice? Was it something that you found came naturally, or was it a bit more of a kind of like a method acting, gotta be my grandmother for a couple of days, kind of a, you know?
Yeah, I mean, all of that. There were moments where I struggled, certainly, but for the most part, the moments when I struggled, it was because I wouldn't know what she would think about something. I wouldn't know what she would think about me. I would feel almost guilty about putting words in her mouth, but I would say that was maybe 2% of the experience of writing it. Overall, I read something recently about a computer program that read 10,000 hours of Shakespeare and then could auto-generate Shakespeare. And when I read that, I thought, oh my God, that's me and my grandma. I had listened to her for 10,000 hours. I not to say that I am an algorithm and this was a simulated, was written in binary, but for my grandma. I listened to her for well over 10,000 hours. And so her voice is just something that, I was, inoculated against, and it became part of me, as part of my system, and ended up coming really readily and fluidly to me when I was tasked by myself with writing her life story. So yeah, I think because we were so close, the gift of her telling me her stories her whole life made this an easy writing project for me.
Yeah, and I mean, that kind of does it into the next question that I had, was that obviously you've written extensively in journalistic capacities or for TV or things like that, and did kind of the process of it being a book suddenly, was that a bit of a challenge, or did you find that it was something that you could kind of just take in your stride and just like an extended episode of something to write?
Yeah, I sort of fell into TV writing by accident. I considered myself a writer. I wrote I wrote serious newspaper articles. I wrote fiction. I was a writer. And, I think ever since I was, 6 years old and saw Little Women, I started putting pen marks on my fingers because there was a scene where Jo March gets has her. This is this is only because I am at home saying this and not to an audience. I'm very real about like why I'm a writer. But I remember wanting someone to look at my hands and be like, "Oh, you're a writer." That's my
Does
British
that happen?
accent.
Do you ever get that?
For sure. No, I don't. They're just like, oh, she has probably a tremor. But the so in many ways this felt like falling back into what I always wanted to do. And I had also, as a comedy writer, as a TV writer, I knew that I wanted to make this book funny. I knew that comedy would be a big part of this book. And also dialogue is a big part of this book because I couldn't untrain myself from doing that. So even though the general project came from this sort of lifelong dream to write a book and to write a real piece of writing, which isn't to say TV writing isn't real writing, but as a young, pretentious child, this is what I always envisioned. And so for that reason, so it's a complicated question, but I think there are elements of TV writing and comedy writing specifically that went into this book, the scenes, the jokes, but there's also something that felt like it was this is so cheap, but it did feel like it was a life goal to write a book. I was so excited to write a book and I welcomed that challenge.
Yeah, and I think anybody who ever writes anything, you think, a book eventually. And the way it just turned out is so, not that anybody has invited me here I'm not a book reviewer, I'm not here to review your book, but it is genuinely so funny that anybody who is watching who hasn't read it, just pick it up because it is a joy to read, even if you will laugh and then next chapter be crying, but it reads, wonderfully like that. And so I read recently, I assume this is okay to talk about, but I did read recently that there was talks about it becoming, making it to the screen eventually, and that you would potentially write the screenplay for that. And I guess what's most important for you in bringing your grandmother's life, which was brought to page, bringing it to screen now? What do you think is most important to retain or anything?
I think I'm so lucky that it's going to be made into a movie and that I'm writing the screenplay. And I think the most important thing, I think, is just capturing. This book tried to capture her spirit, and I don't want that to be lost in translation. I hope that the actor portraying her and I certainly trust the director, and I love the producers of this movie. I love everything they've made, this hypothetical movie, but I do trust the creative team behind it, and ended up going with the creative team that I felt that were as passionate about the book as I was. And so knowing that we're all going in with this collective vision of wanting it to be exactly like the book and wanting it to hopeful that we can all as a team pull it off. And so, yeah, I hope it preserves that feeling that you had when you were reading it. I hope it preserves the laughing and crying and turns of emotion and humor and intimacy. I hope that the movie is able to evoke in the viewer what it evoked in a reader. That's the most important thing to me.
Because it's one thing to cry in our living rooms, but to be sat in the cinema doing that next is the next step. Just one more question. Your camera has broken up a small bit, so if you do find you need to move or anything, there's no problem. Just let us know. It's just we're frozen for a small bit. But I can still hear you wonderfully, so I'm sure that is fine. But just in case anything you need to move or anything, just
oh, good.
That's okay.
Okay. The reality of Zoom
yes.
events.
Yeah, I know.
Is it frozen again? Oh,
Your
okay.
video has.
Okay, here we go. Everybody, you're about to see my house and meet my baby.
This is secretly MTV Cribs. You've all been punked. This is not Bookstr.
How are we now? Is that a little better?
That video is better. Yeah, I can see you now.
Okay.
I hope that it's kind of evened out. And just to kind of very quickly follow up on the last thing you said, do you know who your grandmother would have wanted playing her? I don't know why, but I've just got this like Devil Wears Prada Meryl Streep character coming out whenever I read it and thought about it.
Oh my God. I know my grandma would say Meryl or nothing. But who knows? Yeah, I don't know, but yes, I just hope it's an actor who's up for the task.
Yes.
Are we frozen?
And so your video is slightly, but then it keeps catching up to itself. It's again, like you say, the reality of conducting interviews over Zoom these days. I'm sure we're all well used to it.
Yeah, nothing I can do about it.
And so kind of just to touch on what your grandmother kind of, I guess, would have thought as well. What do you think she would have made of her, quote unquote fame after this? The book is doing fantastically well for good reason. But what do you think she would make of seeing herself on page like that? Do you think it's something that would kind of be a surprise to her, or would she expect it?
I think my grandmother, I think she would be glad that she has the audience she always wanted, that she has lots of people agreeing with her, and she has lots of people appreciating her. I think anybody would be happy with that. I also know that it's not the kind of fame that is unearned. It's people loving her because they've read her story and they've read her voice and really gotten to know her. So it's not like has gained notoriety for being viral about something. It's like people know her because people know of her because they've fallen in love with her. And so I think she has the exact right kind of fame, I guess. But also, it's very surreal. It's even surreal to be talking about her as a character. This is the woman that I love. This is the woman who has many people who love and miss her. And, I can speak about her in the abstract, but I think anyone who's read the book knows this was a very personal book to write and a very raw story about a very complex woman. It's not all saccharine. I opened this by saying this is a love letter, but it's also it's a life letter. It captures the good and bad of her. And so that's all out there and that is all public. But my most important critic and most important reader is my grandfather, her husband and widow. And he loved the book and he calls regularly. He's so excited about how he's doing. He's like, how do we get it in the hands? He like has it out in his apartment building. It's crazy. And with COVID, he's like left it by the front area. It's a whole thing.
Little honesty box.
Oh my God, yeah, totally. Like a little Florida lending library. But most importantly, he has thanked me for writing it repeatedly. And so it's important to my family that this book is out there, her immediate family that this is out there. And so I feel okay about it.
And so, I mean, that actually was my next question, was that, what did your family make of this? Because I can't imagine writing something from the perspective of one of my relatives and bringing, Christmas dinner being like, well, this is about you.
I can't speak for my cousins, and I don't want to speak for I can't speak for her sons. This was a story that wasn't about them, and I didn't ever speak for them or even introduce them. You might be hearing Theo right now.
Well, now we know what Theo thinks of it, so that's even better.
Yeah, but and here's this little jumperoo. But very glamorous. I think that I tried to be as specific as possible, that this is a story that is a matrilineal love story. It's a book about my grandmother, my mother, and me. And I told our stories, and I told them honestly. I told them with a lot of research and care for facts and care for investigating stories that I sort of, there was many things that I was like, is this apocryphal? Is this just sort of family lore? How do I look into this? So I would contact other family members, contacted the surviving daughter of my grandmother's brothers, who, if you read the book, are sort of comic relief and a big part of the book. I did family research and I told a specific story. And for that reason, I hope no one sues me. They're all lawyers. So far, so good.
And so before I have just one or two more questions, if anybody in the audience would like to ask any, make sure that you pop over to the Facebook. There are in the comments, you can leave us questions there. I will magically telepathically see them. They will actually be sent to me through my brain. So I guess throughout the book, there's so many nuggets of wisdom that your grandmother has passed through, whether that's in a voicemail or in things that you kind of, not paraphrase, but put into her words. What do you kind of view as the best piece of advice she ever gave you?
The best piece of advice she gave me is the advice that her grandfather gave her, her Zader gave her. And it's something that I've thought about a lot in quarantine. And it's, if you feel like the earth is cracking behind your feet, you put one foot in front of the other. And I've summoned that. I have said that out loud. I've said it to my husband, who, loves that. I've taken it to heart, and it's how I'm trying to go forward in this strange time where we sort of have to just be completely plugged into the immediate and just try to get through one day after another. And I'm thankful my grandma instilled that in me. And the other good advice she gave was, if you're trying, and by the way, this only applies to a world where there are such thing as stores or trying on clothes. Again, I mean, I've been wearing this, whatever, it's fine.
We may never see that world again. It's online and nothing forevermore.
Right. I've started looking at pillowcases and I've been like, if I cut a hole for a neck, that would be pretty cute dress.
The poncho in the works over there.
Why not? Zoom poncho. But I do feel like she gave good advice, which is, if you ever are trying something on, ignore your child while he is being watched. But here. All right, Bookstr, we're going back into my office.
Oh, no. The full tour.
Oh, that's gonna scar you. This is working motherhood, everybody. Oh, and that is why I will pay for his therapy.
That's the next book. It's the parenting book next.
I am not qualified to write that yet, but although he is a genius and he's perfect. So I did do something right. But the other piece of advice related to shopping was, if you're trying something on and you don't immediately want to parade around the store and be like, I don't know, does this look good? Don't buy it.
And that is excellent advice. I mean, it's just no two ways about it.
Yep.
And so the link for this, by the way, if anybody else needs it, is, like I say, in the chat as well if you need it. But my other question was that, so speaking of advice and kind of, ethos and philosophy and all the rest, a big part of your grandmother's story is kind of, and even your mother's through that story, was standing up for what they believed in. Like, a lot of what comes through in the story is like a strong belief, a strong set of beliefs that they kind of followed through on. And I wondered, was that something that you kind of developed yourself as well, as part of a, if it came, you saw it growing up and things like that?
Yeah, I definitely think I got my political bent and leanings and everything that I get fiery about, and everything that I feel, a deep conviction about. That is because I was raised by feminists, and I was raised by people who were always involved in protest movements of their time, who were always fighting against injustice. I mean, my grandmother's father was a socialist union organizer in Union Square. The reason it's called Union Square in New York is because of people like my great grandfather, who just fought for organizing around workers' rights and collective bargaining. And I come from a long liberal stock. Which makes me feel very unoriginal. I'm like, I'm just a sort of, like, I have friends who have come to that after not being raised by that at all, and I have much more respect for them than my like default just sort of parroting how I was raised. But yes, my grandmother did teach me to fight against injustice, fight for social justice, and I'm very grateful for that.
And so the other thing I wanted to ask, and we kind of joked about it a while ago, but can you see yourself writing another book, or do you think that's kind of not coming up for you?
I am writing another book.
Oh, wow.
The Bookstr, now you know.
An exclusive.
Yeah, I am writing another book. I'm very, very excited about it, and I can't say too much about it yet, but it is also something that blends fiction and non-fictional events, and it is also told in the voice of a very, very opinionated woman.
Of which you've plenty of practice with now at this stage, so that's good.
Yeah.
And so I did have a question here from someone in the audience. Which I am taking now. So if you need to ask your own audience for any questions, your own audience, we're all watching from the same place. But if you needed to use the link to ask anybody to tweet or anything, that's perfectly acceptable too. So from our side, there is a question from Eli who said, "Did you always want to write?" Which, I mean, you've touched on already with your inky hands. I hear you're a writer with your ink fingers.
So embarrassing that I volunteered that information. But I will say, did I always want to write? I definitely did, and I know a lot of writers and book people probably feel similarly, where as a child without a lot of friends, turning to books and turning to writing and seeing these great people who were characters really excited me. And loving books was something that was always part of my upbringing and part of just who I was. And not necessarily great books. I loved Madeline. I loved the way it rhymed. I was just enchanted by reading. And so I think as a big fan of books, I thought, like, well, I don't know if I have a story to tell yet, and hopefully one day I can be a part of that, and I can hold a book in my hand that I've written, and it is surreal to have done that. It really, I feel like I honored the like young nerd that I was, but also like the very confident. I was much more confident writer as a child. I wrote all the time. I even wrote about my grandma. I have all of the writing that I had when I was little, and it's not great, but it's prolific. And I think as someone who just loved reading, loved writing from a very young age, it was inevitable. I'm so lucky I got to do it for real. Yeah.
So I have another question here from Matthew, who said, "Besides your grandmother, who is your biggest inspiration?"
Besides my grandmother, who's my biggest inspiration? It's a great question. There are certainly writers who are inspiring to me. I have many different kinds of, I don't follow a guru, so there's not just one person who is my inspiration. But as a which honestly, that sounds like a relief. People who do like that, I get it. But I am inspired by the writing of women like Susan Orlean, Joan Didion, great nonfiction writers who are able to just nail a description, and then that becomes the only way that you see it. I feel like they have superpowers to be able to do that, to sort of own an experience and translate it in a way that makes it magical and also changes the way you view the world. There's so many specific examples of that, but in all of their writing. So they are my literary inspirations for that reason. I hope to have like a sentence in the book that makes someone feel the way I feel reading every sentence that they write. And there's just not a loss. They're so great. And inspiration in my personal life. all of my friends inspire me. I I I I also am not friends with many people in the entertainment industry. Maybe that's why. But all of my friends from college and from growing up who I'm so lucky have moved to LA. Like we've all made our way to LA together. But I'm inspired by. I mean, I will say my friend Kelly, who's public defender, inspires me. My friend Katie, who's a brilliant writer, inspires me. My cousin Zoe, who is a brilliant chef, inspires me. I'm inspired. I surround myself with. I'm so lucky to be surrounded by so many people who inspire me, and they, you know what? As I said, they all happen to be women. And sorry,
Sorry, man, we didn't make the rules
yeah,
here.
sorry, yeah, yeah, just keep writing history.
And so you touched on a couple of authors there, but Lauren asked, what are your favorite books to read? Do you have, like, I'm sure I still say Little Women myself as an adult, but
Oh, yeah, I mean that definitely that is the book that made the most profound impact on my life for sure. But my favorite book to read, I go back to the Neapolitan novels like they're a drug. Like I'll cycle through My Brilliant Friend. The like those are my like soothing reading. Uh, I was a student of 19th century English literature in school, so that was my like I was forged by Jane Austen, Emily Bronte, Thackeray, George Eliot, like that type of those types of stories appealed to me when I was like the most voracious reader that I ever was, which is in college and high school. Um, but I also love reading funny books. I love comedy books. I my friend Mike Birbiglia just wrote a book with his wife Jen, and it's brilliant. It's called The New One. If you don't have it, I suggest you get it immediately, about parenthood. Mike is so brilliant, so funny. I love reading everything he writes. Lindy West's books are amazing. Sam Irby's books are amazing. I love reading funny comedy books to unwind at the end of the day.
especially nowadays, I think it's very well needed. So I had a question here from David who said, did you adopt any of your grandmother's traditions if she had any?
You know, I find that I have adopted all of her micro traditions in ways. Like I'm always worried that my son is cold. I like, and I, he's always like he was born in August of last year, and he was like always wearing a hat. But um, I the ritual that I will adopt is I on the day of her death, on the anniversary of her death, I have tea, which for you, Saoirse, is probably like what? That's every day. But
It's true, it is an Irish.
but we're like, oh wow, yeah, once a year, good job. The, but the she took me to fancy high tea growing up, which is not something that is part of my life here, but in my adulthood. But I do make a little cup of tea, and I put it in her fancy china cup, and that's us having tea together. I said on the anniversary of her death. That's not what I do it on her birthday, which is 3 days after the anniversary of her death.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
And so I did have another question here from Michael who said, what was it like working on Jimmy Kimmel?
It was the best. It was the best. The best people, the best job. I'm a fool to have left. I regret it all the time. What am I thinking? Those are my friends. That's my like my like maybe they're probably not watching. Jeff and Bridger are my like my people my they're my family as well. Like these are we've all but broken quarantine for each other, but I yeah, it was hard. I gave my notice like two days before the whole world went into lockdown, and so my like goodbye party was over Zoom. And all this, but I miss it deeply. It was the most educational experience of my life. I learned how to be a good writer there, and Jimmy is one of the best writers I know. He's also an inspiration to me. The idea of like the hardest working, most generous, kindest boss anyone could have. And also having to write comedy every single day on deadline helped me train for writing a book. I couldn't have done this if I wasn't, yeah, if I wasn't like hammered into a machine by the show. So I'm so grateful for my time there, and I'm so the book in many ways, and Jimmy has thanked in the acknowledgments, but this book would not exist without that place and that show, and my boss Molly and Jimmy and yeah, everybody.
And so I had another question here from our audience, and Eleanor said, was it hard to work through the voicemails to put the book together?
So I did not listen to the voicemails before writing the book. I have all of the voicemails here, which I can show you because we are on Zoom, and I can just. But this is my voicemail box, Grandma Scars.
Oh my God.
It is there from in the book, and
wow.
A lot of them were unlistened to until right before I had to record the audiobook, because we wanted to include some of them in the audiobook. All of the voicemails in the book are from memory and from like the repeated tropes of the types of voicemails that she would use. And the only time her exact words are in the book is an email from her that is in the book, and it's perfect.
It is.
The best email probably anyone's ever received. That's what this is, one of my first emails, Grandma. Not my first email, one of. But
we're not special.
Right.
On the list.
I was on the list. Yeah. Email day. But it was very, very hard. Once I did listen to them, I thought it would be a lot harder. I was very dramatic. I like cleared my husband and at that point newborn out of the room, which you've already seen me do. I'm a callous. I'm gonna, and after this interview, that child is gonna be so smothered in kisses, he's gonna need like read therapy. I sat down, I was ready to cry, and I ended up just laughing because she, as you know, the book was so funny.
And so Ruth asks, you have a pretty famously large following on Twitter. How did that happen? And what are some of the most interesting things that have happened through it? Oh, and Scott is saying, if you want to ask your people to submit questions, you can do that too.
Oh, I did.
Amazing.
I have questions during the one of the like the melee that I interrupted. So how did I get the following? I don't know. I probably from neither do my parents or husband. They're like, oh, Jesus Christ, may it all go away. But it really caught on. I mean, I had like a comedy following, like every working comedian in LA. We follow each other and are friends to each other's faces, and it's great. And the blow up happened after I started replying to Donald Trump, and I was doing this like shticky thing where I was responding to him as a nice mom, being like, "Don't worry, sweetie, like it's okay. We can see that you're panicking," and like, "Oh no, you're spiraling," and we all, if you need me to pick you up, it was that kind of thing, and because that's how he tweets, and I think people found that really cathartic, and like it got a lot of like resist people on Twitter, which I'm so like, yay, I'm on board with that. And so I think people were expecting a lot of politics from me, and I am quite political. I work also in a policy world as well on the side. But a lot of the time, my Twitter is just like, I'm, breastfeeding at 3 a.m. So, you all signed up for this, and here's what I have to say.
No takebacks. You're in for the long haul.
Like, yeah. So I have a lot of followers, and I've lost a lot of followers.
And so I have a question from Anna, who said, what was it like to write for the Oscars? Was it as fun as Kimmel, or was it a lot different?
Oh, it was more fun because I got to wear a ball gown.
I mean,
you know, when I got into writing, I was like, I'm doing this for one reason and one reason only. It's to go to the Oscars. So, like, mission accomplished. Bye, everybody.
I'm done.
And I stayed
Career
for
finished.
several years. Yeah, yeah. Well, like, I actually went to the Oscars twice, which was crazy because I like with the writers and I would be like, I forget which Oscars was it. Meanwhile, we are fully stagehands. We're not like at the Oscars. We're not
Right.
invited. We're in the. We have like lanyards around our necks, and we're like crouched over like two laptops in a very small area. It's not glamorous at all. And then we feel like fools in like tuxedos. And my like, you know, at the beginning of the night, I'm like, yes, I've arrived. People are going to be like, Jennifer, we love your work.
Who are you wearing? Who are you wearing?
Right. But by the end of the night, I'm just like weirdly in this like rented dress with like streaks of makeup because I've been a writer, like biting my nails. So it's not, so like, I would say glamorous on Instagram.
And so I have a question here from Camilla, who said, would you ever kind of branch into just fiction? Do you think like a fiction collection is in your future?
My next book is definitely in the fiction
right.
camp. Yeah, it is. Even though there are like real events that inspired it, it is a work of fiction. Yeah.
And I have another question from Kensley, who said, have you been writing much in lockdown? And if so, has it been influenced by the pandemic?
Probably in some way. I think anyone who like it has crept into everything that we're thinking about, and it is the place that I'm coming from, which, you know, affects whatever output there's been. There hasn't been a ton of output. It is hard to write in the pandemic, just attending to immediate needs, being at home with the baby. It's not the most productive time of my life, but it is also not the least productive time. I'm trying, and I will. I'm doing my best.
I'm just waiting for one or two if there's any more to come in there into the comments. Just one moment. So with this, just something that just came to me a while ago. Obviously in the book there was a lot of East Coast versus West Coast discourse, and I wonder, would you ever return to the East Coast, or do you think for sure?
One day, I'm sure I will. One day I will. It's my, you know, that's the mothership.
It sounds like from the book that your grandmother kind of was such a jet setter, you know.
Yeah.
Like there's like this little throwaways. I'll fly straight to New York. I'm reading it and I was like, whoa, whiplash, weren't you just in Florida? What's happening?
I am not that way. I get off of the plane and I look like I've been to war. You know, she was like, there's like snacks on everything. I like a day of her. But yeah, no, she was great. She had a lot more energy than at 80 than I do at whatever age I am, 33. Yeah.
I do have a question here from Bob, who said, what is your favorite thing about being a comedy writer? And would you also want to be in front of the camera more?
In front of the camera more? No. No, this is, you know, you're looking at a real face from Microsoft Word here. But you can see me in my glasses, which I'm not wearing because of the reflection, but this is what my grandpa Hank looks like if you've read the book. I don't need to live in that world of scrutiny, but I mean, it's like I'm not like, I don't have bad self-esteem. I just don't want to be in that world. But and I do have a bad self-esteem. And what's it like being a comedy writer? It's agony. So, you know, you have to take the world's pain, digest it, and then make other people feel better about it. You have to be really messed up to do that.
And I mean, speaking of comedy, as whether messed up or no, Sam says, how do you test out your material?
Oh, as you probably can see from this interview, I am always the one who laughs hardest at my own show. So, which is delightful for my friends and family. I have literally brought myself to tears. So I am my own best and worst audience for that reason. If I think it's funny, then good. If I don't think it's funny, I don't write it.
I would recommend, once your son can talk and walk, I had a group of very young cousins recently came up with a game where you had to throw the frisbee to someone across the circle, but you had to tell a joke. And if nobody in the circle laughed, you just had to keep hold of the frisbee, and it was agony. So if you're ever wanting to test out your comedy, just ask some 6-year-olds.
So I would be
Throw a
so
frisbee
bad
at
at that
you.
thing. There's nothing worse than being
No.
like commanded to tell a joke. I would be like clutching the frisbee for dear life.
Yeah, run away with it. So I've got a question here from Chris. He says, what advice would you give to other people who want to get into comedy?
I will end with this advice that my grandmother gave me, and it's a great question, Chris, and it's what led me into comedy, which is, again, this is, I guess, mostly for women. She asked me, what would a man do? And I think what that means for a woman who wanted to get into a field where, I mean, when I became a writer at Kimmel in 2012, there were more female Supreme Court justices than women in late night, in primetime late night. Jon Stewart had none. Leno had none. Letterman had one. Conan had one. Fallon had none. Oh no, Fallon wasn't even primetime. It was just like there were just no women. Like look at the people, look at who like was carrying the Emmys behind Stewart, who's a great guy, and a lot of his writers are great people. But I don't know the rest. But like that's not like a scoop. But like there's just women involved with comedy writing for late night, and so I think what my grandma meant by do what a man would do is do it even if you are told by the world that you're not welcome in that room. If you think you're funny enough to make yourself laugh until you cry, like maybe at least 2 other people will, and maybe those are the people who will hire you. I'm so lucky that Jimmy and Molly and Gary thought I was, and then continually try to prove them right over the years.
And as you say, that is a beautiful and wonderful note to finish up on. So I guess just very lastly, if you could tell people where to get your book best, where's the best place to find you? Obviously, we know we get the inside scoop on the Twitter, so definitely start with that.
I would suggest you support your local independent bookstore. If you're going to buy Nobody Will Tell You This But Me, you can go to IndieBound or bookshop.org, and bookstores are in trouble right now due to closures, and so support your local bookstores and order a copy for yourself or someone you love. Yes.
Excellent. And the best place to find you on your Instagram or your Twitter?
Oh, Twitter at Bess.
Holler in the streets at Bess. Lovely.
Okay. I thank you so much to Bookstr. Thank you to Saoirse. Thank you everybody who tuned in. And now I have to go be a mother. But I
and really thank you very much. We thank you too.
Thank you.
Have a lovely afternoon.